right, team. So at this point, you should have read and taken notes and kind of started to get a better understanding of the Cold War, right? Which is kind of the focus of this unit. Our goal today is to understand how we got to the Cold War, right? We just finished World War II. Some of the last things you looked at is the victory in Europe and victory in Japan days from World War II. And so now we're trying to understand, well, why a Cold War? What happens, right? And so the Cold War is really this ideological debate, and we'll talk about what a Cold War is, but really right now we're understanding our key players and how we even got those key players. And so the Cold War is this question of, so there's a lot of destruction after World War II. How do we fix the world? And there are two big responses to it, capitalism and communism. And that's really what the Cold War is about. So after World War II, millions are dead, destruction is rampant in Europe, people's valuables, properties are completely destroyed. Japan, 2 cities are leveled, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as a result of dropping the atomic bomb. And so the question is, where do we go from here? And so there's 2 players that come up with answers, and that's the United States and the USSR. The United States answer is capitalism, and the USSR's answer is communism. And so we have this 6-year period of war, tragic, devastating. And so the war ends, and then we're followed with 45 years of Cold War. And you even see the effects of the Cold War in modern day America, right? Like this continuous disagreement between the United States and the USSR. And so that's kind of the direction we're headed. What's interesting, though, is that the Cold War actually and World War II actually overlap with each other a little bit. So you should have read about the Yalta and the Potsdam conferences, which is where we're starting. The Yalta Conference took place in February 1945. That is significant because it took place before World War II was even over, right? At that point, the Allies have banded together. The United States is in the war. We have a strong Allied front that is fighting the Germans. The big 3 at the Yalta Conference, from left to right in that image, were Winston Churchill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin. And this conference takes place in Yalta in the USSR at the time, but modern day Ukraine. So what happens at this conference? It's decided that Germany would be temporarily divided into 4 occupied zones. The United Nations is officially established, and it would replace the League of Nations. And the USSR vows to join the war against Japan 3 months after Germany surrendered. Okay, so let's think. Put our thinking caps on. Victory in Europe Day was in May 1945. Okay, this conference is in February 1945, so 3 months before. The atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki are dropped in August 1945. So the USSR actually never ends up joining the war against Japan as they promised the Allied government. The Allies also promised each other to establish democratic governments in Europe based on free elections. And we'll actually see how that plays out when we continue to look at the Cold War. Germany at the Yalta Conference, and as a result of World War II, pays the price. They had to agree to unconditional surrender. They had no say over Nazi Germany. Now, this is significant, right? Remember what happened as a result of World War I. Not only was Germany split into 4 occupied zones, one occupied by the Soviets, one by the British, one by the Americans, and one by the French, its capital, Berlin, was also divided into 4 occupied zones. And the Allied armies promised and vowed to stay present in not only Germany, but also in Berlin. Now, as a result of the Yalta Conference, many other countries also became communist because the USSR extended their sphere of influence. For example, Poland. As a result of the Yalta Conference, Poland remains communist until 1990 when the Berlin Wall falls. So that is Yalta, right? Our second World War II conference is the Potsdam Conference. And the Potsdam Conference happens in July 1945. Note the timing of this as well, right? So Yalta happens in February 1945. Victory in Europe happens in May 1945. And then we have the Potsdam Conference in July 1945, which is still before the atomic bombs are dropped in August 1945. So the second meeting is really to decide and hone in a lot of the decisions that were made in Yalta, because this meeting happens after victory in Europe is declared. And this conference, Potsdam, is held in Germany. Now, this is what's also really important to note. Taking a look at that picture, you see that these are now the big three of the Potsdam. You should notice two differences. Winston Churchill is replaced by Prime Minister Clement Attlee. FDR dies in office, and he is replaced by President Truman. The only person that remains is Joseph Stalin, which then speaks to the power and the influence Stalin will have at this conference, since he is the only one that remains from the original Yalta conference. Agreements at Yalta were made, but they were never really solidified, and that's what the purpose of Potsdam is. And as mentioned, Stalin is the only original. Well, at this conference, Truman informed Stalin of a successful nuclear test. Stalin pretends to be surprised when the atomic bombs are eventually dropped, and then later claims that he actually didn't understand when Truman told him. Who knows, right? Ultimately, the big three, so Attlee, Truman, and Stalin, decide that Germany would undergo demilitarization and denazification. This is where Germany and Berlin are officially divided into 4 zones. But the most significant is that Stalin, being the only original, sets himself up to take over all of East Germany. And this is how the Cold War begins. And this is just a chart of the differences between Yalta and Potsdam. You're welcome to just pause it, take a look, kind of take notes. I'm going to keep going. So once you're done, you can unpause it. So how does this Cold War begin, right? The Cold War, as I mentioned, is the response to how do we solve all the problems that World War II created. And so the conflicts arise over really 3 ways. One is, how do we fix the world economically? 2, how do we fix the world politically? And then 3, how do we fix the world socially? So in terms of economic theory, we're looking at capitalism of the West versus communism of the East. In terms of politics, we're looking at democracy versus totalitarianism. And then in terms of social aspects, we're looking at individual rights versus duty to the state and life for the community. Now, I want to make something very clear here, right? I am looking at these 2 ideas theoretically, right? Capitalism theoretically and communism theoretically. That's really significant because we know in practice they're much, much different. So it's important to continue to keep this like lens and idea of theory in mind here. Sorry about that. Okay, so how do we look at this economically? The theory of capitalism is based on competition and supply and demand. The market sets the prices. The government has very little to do or nothing to do with regulation, and there's an assumption that income and wealth will be unequal. For example, looking at cheeseburgers, because I'm craving one right now. Culver's makes a cheeseburger that is delicious, right? I don't know, let's say it's $5. Portillo's wants to be a competitor of Culver's, and they also create a cheeseburger, and they say, you know what, my cheeseburger is actually going to be $4.50, right? And that competition fuels the market and then supply and demand. So if Culver's wasn't selling their cheeseburgers for $5, they'd probably think, I wonder how I can get a better price and get more people to want it. So they make it $4, right? The government has very little influence. This is theoretically, again. The assumption is that income and wealth will be unequal because capitalism relies on what's known as the bootstrap theory. The harder you work, the more money you will get, right? Okay, that's capitalism. On the flip side, communism is based on central control and cooperation. The government decides what is produced and the prices. So a cheeseburger is $5 no matter where, right? Culver's has a cheeseburger, Portillo's has a cheeseburger. Al Cheval has a cheeseburger, and they're all $5. Under communism, there's very little private property, and the stated goal is to not have any poor people, but also to not have any wealthy people. Everyone is on the same playing field. Again, these are theories, right? We're not looking how this works in practice. We're looking at theories right now. Well, if we're looking socially and politically, to live under communism is to live under a totalitarian state. So under totalitarianism, there is state-controlled media, which means that the government controls the media. There is no religion. You're really not able to travel outside of communist countries unless you get special papers or permission. The state was supposed to provide all the necessities, and then property was given by the government. Now, to live under capitalism is to assume that you are living under democracy. So there's a freedom of speech, religion, movement. You can choose what you want to buy, what you want to sell, and to own whatever property you get, right? The key here is to understand that the United States has personal individual freedoms, theoretically under capitalism and under democracy. Theoretically, the USSR, under communism, was also controlled by a totalitarian state. Now, here's something important to note, right? This is when we look at practice. So theoretically, this is how everything would function, right? In practice, this is how things started to function. Communism and totalitarianism started to blur the lines in the time of the Cold War. Okay, so how was this interpreted in the United States, this argument between communism and capitalism? Let's take a look. So there is this cartoon that was made as an anti-communist propaganda related to personal freedoms. Let's go ahead and watch it together.
America is many things to many people. To a 17-year-old kid, it's the malt shop on the corner. To Grandpa, it's the front porch in the cool of the evening. To Mother and her family, it's church on Sunday morning. And to Dad, it's his favorite relaxation. It's the Cracker Barrel philosophers in Crabtree Corners. And it's the tycoons in Wall Street. It's all races, creeds, and religions. It's freedom to work at the job you like. Freedom of speech and to peaceably assemble. Freedom to own property. Security from unlawful search or seizure.
Where's your warrant, Flatfoot?
The right to a speedy and public trial. Protection against cruel punishments and excessive fines. The right to vote. And to worship God in your own way. It is these freedoms that have made America strong.
Okay, so we got our freedom. But management's lousing up everything.
Labor is at fault. It's ruining the country. My constituents, as your elected representative, I can assure you Labor's right. Management's right. I'm strictly neutral.
Labor? Management? Politicians? Phooey. They can't tell corn from oats.
What?
It will really take the money out of
Strike!
Hurry, step right up, folks. Here's the answer to your problems. Dr. Utopia's sensational new discovery, ISM. ISM will cure any ailment of the body politic. It's terrific. It's tremendous. Once you swallow the contents of this bottle, you'll have the bountiful benefit of higher wages, shorter hours, and security. Enormous profits, no strikes. Remember, you're the big boss. Government control, no worry about votes. Name your own salary. Bigger crops, lower cost. Why, ISM even makes the weather perfect every day. And now then, because we are introducing this amazing item for the first time in this country, it isn't going to cost you 1 cent. All you have to do is sign this little scrap of paper, and you get your bottle absolutely free.
I hereby turn over to ISM Incorporated everything I have, including my freedom and the freedom of my children and my children's children, in return for which said ISM promises to take care of me forever.
Pardon me. Pardon me.
And who are you, my good man?
I'm John Q. Public.
Ah, my fine friend, you're just in time to share this generous and gigantic offer. Sign right here.
Mind if I read it first?
Hurry up, now,
Let me see.
I was here first.
Keep your shirts on, boys.
No, including my freedom.
Freedom? Well, sign away my freedom. Why, this is ridiculous.
Don't be corny, brother.
Sure, our system of free enterprise isn't perfect. But before we throw it away for some imported double talk, let's turn the clock back a few years to see what it's done for us. For example, back in the 1890s, Joe Dokes was just a guy who liked to tinker around his barn. Some people thought Joe was lazy. Some even thought he was nuts. But one day, he had an idea. And because he was free to dream his dream and tinker, Joe had a chance to make something of himself and his idea. So, of course, some people didn't think so much of Joe's idea. But that didn't stop him. So Joe got some money from young Aunt Minnie and Uncle Angus and Grandpappy and Mr. Titus. When Joe's friends and relatives used their savings to help him buy tools and property, they were capitalists. Don't blush, folks. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Now, naturally, Joe needed some help. So he hired Willie Lumpkin, who was out of work anyway, and before long, Willie had the know-how and became skilled labor. Because capital, management, and labor worked together, Joe's idea grew. It grew and did things even he never dreamed of. Today, the automobile industry provides millions of jobs that never existed before. And remember, this is a story of only one industry. There are thousands more scattered all over the United States whose history of development is pretty much the same. We've built a country under the American system that sends more young people to high school and college than all the rest of the world combined. Why, even in the Depression, our wages bought more food, clothing, travel, and entertainment than the wages of any other people in the world. Our country has a national income equal to the total national incomes of any other sixth nation in the world. With only 7% of the Earth's, we drive 70% of the world's automobiles. That's just a sample of the things the capitalistic system has given us in only 160 years. Before signing up, you boys ought to try a little taste of Dr. Ism's formula to see what you'd get in exchange for your freedom. Go ahead, try it.
You can't do this to me! I'll strike!
The state forbids strikes.
Wait till the union hears about this!
Ah, yes, the Union. Welcome to our ranks, number 1313.
I'll take this case to the Supreme Court.
The state is the Supreme Court. Our decision is as follows. No No more private property. No more you.
The farm vote will put a stop to this.
Farmers don't vote anymore.
What'll I do for seed next year?
You won't have to worry about next year. The state will do your planning from now on.
We must fight to regain our freedom, or everything is lost. Everything.
Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine.
When anybody preaches disunity, tries to pit one of us against the other through class warfare, race hatred, or religious intolerance, you know that person seeks to rob us of our freedom and destroy our very lives. And we know what to do about it.
And now, gentlemen, no violence, please. Don't throw those bottles. Don't throw those bottles. No! Oh, no,
Working together to produce an ever greater abundance of material and spiritual values for all. That is the secret of American prosperity.
All right, team. So now after watching that video cartoon propaganda piece, let me know in the comments. 1, your reaction to the video. 2, if you were an American living at the time of the Cold War, how would you respond to the video? And 3, if you were someone who supported communism at the time of the Cold War and saw this video, how would you react? Okay, so 3 parts to that comment. Let us know. Drop it in the comments, and we will see you guys soon. Thanks, guys.